Live from Jacksonville, Florida, this is Debate Night. We want to welcome viewers from around the Sunshine State and around the country. I'm Jake Tapper from CNN's The Lead. Tonight, I'll have questions for incumbent Governor Rick Scott and for former Governor Charlie Crist. I am joined tonight by WJXT anchor Kent Justice. We'll also be asking questions directly from Floridians via social media, and you can join this debate in real time. Go to bing.com/CNN to vote on which candidate's answers you find the most or the least convincing. Each governor will have 1 minute to respond to our questions and 30 seconds for rebuttal. I'll allow for conversation between the candidates. I will also try to press for questions to be answered. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Everybody's comfortable here?
Thank you, yes.
Everybody's comfortable. Okay, good. Let's start with you, Governor Scott, and an issue that's on the mind of every governor around the country and millions of Americans, Ebola. If tomorrow a patient were to test positive at Memorial Hospital here in Jacksonville, would you transfer that patient to one of the 4 hospitals outside the state that has biocontainment units? Or are you completely confident that hospitals in this state could treat that patient without any Florida healthcare workers getting sick?
Sure. So here's what we've done so far, and I would feel comfortable that we're doing the right thing right here in Florida. So when this first came out, here's how I thought about it. We have almost 20 million people in the state. We have about 100 million tourists that come to our state. We have healthcare workers and we have first responders. My goal was to make everybody feel comfortable that we were prepared. Just like if there was going to be a hurricane, we would be prepared for it. So the first thing I did is I started asking for things from the CDC. We wanted more testing kits. We've asked for 30. We have gotten 3 so far. We asked for more protective gear. We haven't gotten that from the CDC yet. We asked for them to do a conference call with all of our healthcare workers to explain what happened in Atlanta versus what happened in Dallas, because I used to be in the hospital business. You try to find best practices. They did that yesterday, so that was a positive. We have asked if we can use some of the federal funding in our own agencies to buy more equipment. They've allowed us to do that, so we're buying with their money and state money protective gear.
Thank you, Governor.
So we're heading in the right direction.
All right, so just to be clear, though, that you feel comfortable with the patient staying
Absolutely.
here. Okay, Governor Crist, let me ask you a question. In the last debate, you gave Governor Scott high marks when it came to his handling of Ebola. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the marks President Obama? What marks would you give President Obama when it comes to his handling of this crisis?
I'd probably give it an 8. I think we had a little bit of a slow start. I think everybody kind of recognizes that, but I think they've really caught their stride. I think the federal administration is doing a commendable job with a difficult situation. And I think it's important that the president work with governors throughout the country, make sure that we're doing everything possible, everything humanly possible to be prepared and not panicked for this issue. I think working with the CDC is important as well. And anybody in the public health arena who has experience with scenarios like this, we need to rely on them most importantly.
All right, let's bring in WJXT anchor Kent Justice for the next question. Kent.
Thanks, Jake. Governors, it's an honor to be a voice for Florida voters tonight. And to that point, Governor Crist, we've got a question now from Facebook. Florida voter Andrea Sawchuk from Ormond Beach asks this: why should we trust Charlie Crist? He has flipped parties, views on education, health care, and abortion. It seems like he just does what is expedient for Charlie Crist. Governor, respond to Andrea and the other voters who may have that concern.
Sure. Well, what I think is important is that you're true to your core beliefs, to how you're raised, and that's what I've done. It's frankly why I'm not a Republican anymore. The Republican leadership, sadly, has gone so hard to the right under the Tea Party kidnapping, if you will, that it just wasn't consistent with how I was raised by my mother and father in St. Petersburg. On abortion, I've always been, personally pro-life, but have never felt that it was right for government to impose its will. I think it's important for women to be able to make their own choices about their own bodies. And Governor Scott has a different point of view on that. I'm somebody that you can trust. I am who I've always been. I call it the way I see it. I am for education. I want to protect our environment. Women should have the right to choose. We ought to raise the minimum wage. These are things that I feel very strongly about and always have.
Governor Scott, your name was invoked. If you'd like 30 seconds,
Sure.
you can have it.
Well, one thing that should all concern us is Charlie said that he's taken positions for political expediency, meaning to get elected.
That's not true.
So that's exactly what he said. And when you say that, then what is he saying this year that he actually believes, whether it's on taxes or education or abortion or women's rights? What positions is he taking today that he actually is doing just to get elected?
Governor Crist, if you want, you can respond to that.
Well, it was interesting. He talked about, you know, how do you know Charlie's telling the truth? How do you know Rick's telling the truth? I mean, let's remember what we're dealing with here. This is a man whose company was charged with Medicare fraud and had to end up paying the largest fine for Medicare fraud in the history of the United States of America, $1.7 billion. And I think you actually worked on the story, Jake, and you did a great job. But, you know, when you bring that kind of background into the governor's office, and then you have the kind of cronyism that we do in the Scott administration, it makes it hard to believe anything he says.
Governor Scott?
Sure. Right there's the big difference between Charlie and me. All right. I built a company from scratch. In 9 years, we went from me to 285,000 employees. When something went wrong, I said in 2010, I'll say today, I take responsibility. There's always something you can do better. But Charlie's never taken responsibility. He says he's not responsible. Scott Rothstein testified under oath that Charlie was paid to appoint judges. Charlie won't take responsibility. His handpicked party chairman went to prison. Both these guys raised money while committing fraud. Charlie says he's not responsible. He says when 832,000 jobs were lost, he's not responsible.
Thank you, Governor. Governor Scott, I have a question for you. Florida.
May I respond to that? That was pretty serious.
Sure,
and
Governor
personal.
Crist, go
Thank you. You know, the notion that he would put millions of dollars behind a commercial where somebody who's a convicted felon makes a false accusation against me is stunning. I mean, that's so irresponsible, and that's not being accountable. And Rick, you talk about being accountable. How were you accountable with HCA at all? You wouldn't answer questions 75 times under oath. You pled the Fifth Amendment. You know, you paid no fine. You didn't give any money back. You left with, you know, a couple $100 million when you were kicked out by the board. I don't call that, you know, being responsible.
If I may, let me ask a direct question of each of you having to do with charges that you have each leveled just now against the other. Governor Scott, you say you've taken responsibility for what happened at Columbia HCA. What specifically are you taking responsibility for? What happened at that firm resulting in a $1.7 billion fine that you say, I was responsible?
What I say is when you have a company like that and something goes wrong, you know, you say, I thought about what could I do better? What could I have done better? I could have hired more auditors. That's why I said in 2010, and I wish I had done that. But let's remember, I've said I took responsibility for that. Charlie is not responsible for 832,000 jobs lost, raising taxes $2.2 billion, raising tuition when he said he was against all those things, when we elected him saying he was a Ronald Reagan Republican and then did just the opposite. And again, he won't respond to the fact that what judges did he appoint for the campaign contributions? He won't respond to that. He won't respond to what he knew that Jim Brew was doing when he was committing fraud and raising money for Charlie. Did Charlie give any of that money back? No, Charlie didn't give any of the money back. He kept all that money, even though he said he was a Republican at the time.
We gave all the money back. You are just wrong.
You didn't, Charlie. You didn't give the money back.
Yeah, well, we'll see it in the paper tomorrow.
Governor Crist, if you can respond. If you want, you can respond to that, or I have a question for you.
I'm ready for your question. I think we need to move on. I mean, it's obvious that he has his problems, and I don't.
The question is about the charge that he leveled against you, because you leveled one against him that I asked about.
Sure.
There have been a number of close associates of yours that have gone to prison. What does that say about your judgment?
Well, you know, I don't have a crystal ball, and you can't always foresee what people are going to do in their future. Let me give an example. You know, I've met people that later took a bad turn. That happens, and it's unfortunate. It also happened to Jeb Bush. He picked a secretary at the Department of Corrections who's now in federal prison. I mean, those things happen. You can't always foresee that somebody might go bad later on. And I'm no different than Governor Bush was in that scenario.
Let's move on. Governor Scott, Florida prides itself on its open government laws. It's right in the Constitution. Reporters investigating your finances have found that federal documents appear to show that you have much more money tied up in family trusts than you have disclosed. Why not do what the state constitution requires and file a, quote, full and public disclosure of your financial interests? What I'm looking for here, Governor, is what's the reason for your reluctance to provide this information to the voters of a state that prides itself on open government?
Well, I believe in open government, and that's what I've done. Let's look at what I've done. In 2010, when I ran, I disclosed the assets. I did exactly what the grand jury suggested under Charlie, that I put my assets in a blind trust. Why do you do that? So you don't know what you own, if you have any assets, so you don't have a conflict. Jeb Bush did it. Alex Sink did it when she was CFO. I did the same thing. But on top of that, this year, I disclosed everything in the blind trust when I did my filing, and I also filed my tax returns, mine and my wife's. I've done all that Charlie hasn't. Charlie has not released his and his wife's tax return like Jeb Bush did, like Alex Sink did, like Bill McBride did, like I did. But I absolutely have disclosed everything, and I'll continue to disclose everything.
Governor Crist?
I've disclosed all my tax returns. In fact, I think I've disclosed them for the last 15 years. Rick Scott has not done that. And he talks about the fact that my wife has not released hers. That's true. We file separately. And I believe in a woman's right to choose. And I'm going to protect her from that if that's what she wants. I just don't think that that's fair for Governor Scott to try to impose my wife. She's not running for anything. This is an election between you and me, Rick.
All right, let's move on to an issue that is foremost among the minds of Florida voters, and that is, of course, jobs and the economy. Governor Crist, as you know, and Governor Scott reminds us quite often, more than 800,000 jobs were lost while you were governor. Now, when that is raised, you always say that you are not responsible for the global economic meltdown that occurred during your term. But Florida did have the second highest job loss in the nation. Are you saying that you're not to blame for any of the jobs lost while you were governor?
No, I don't think I was, and I'll tell you why. You know, when I came into office, we were starting to experience a real estate meltdown in particular. We're in Florida. We depend on real estate an awful lot in our state, and I know the viewers that are watching tonight get that. And what Rick Scott doesn't get is the fact that, you know, even though he talks about creating more than 600,000 jobs, I was not responsible for the global economic meltdown any more than Rick was responsible for the national economic recovery. And, you know, if you're somebody who flies around in a private jet and you live on a mansion on the sea, it's hard to understand what people are suffering from. And this is probably the most important thing I will say tonight. The real difference in this race is I understand what you're dealing with. I talk to people that are working 2 and 3 jobs every day I'm out there in Florida. I am on your side. And unfortunately, Rick Scott is not.
Governor Scott, you want to respond?
Well, first off, Charlie, you grew up with money. I grew up with families that struggled. I don't know my natural father. I lived in public housing. I have an adopted dad. They struggled for money. I know what it's like to watch a parent lose the only family car we had. So I know what people... I watched my parents struggle when my brother couldn't get health care. So, Charlie, I didn't grow up with money like you did. You grew up with plenty of money. Charlie, you lost more jobs than in any state but one. We had the second highest increase in unemployment in the country.
Thank you, Governor.
A million homes were foreclosed on when you were governor.
Thank you, Governor. Let's go back now to Ken
May
Justice.
I, just one quick...
Well, we're staying on the topic of jobs.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
great.
let's stay there on jobs and economy. And Governor Scott, 4 years ago, running for office in an October 2010 gubernatorial debate, you promised in 7 years you'd create 700,000 new jobs, quote, on top of what normal growth would be. Economists expected that to be 1 million jobs, so you add those together, it's 1.7 million new jobs. So far, and as of today, we've looked at these numbers, about 626,000 new jobs have been created, well short of your mark. So the question is, why aren't you meeting your own benchmark?
Sure. So I ran on a campaign of 7 steps to 700,000 jobs over 7 years. We've added 651,000 private sector jobs so far. We have 261,000 job openings right now. Now let's look at what normal growth was when I took office. Normal growth was, under Charlie, you would lose 832,000 jobs. So normal growth would be double that. Normal growth at the time was unemployment going from 3.5 to 11.1%. So normal growth under Charlie would have been now unemployment at 18%. So if you go back and look at what normal growth was when I took office, it was losing 800,000 jobs over 4 years. But we've added 651,000 jobs, 261,000 job openings. Average income for those openings for the top 25 in demand is $27 an hour or $55,000 annual income, and we've down to a little over 100,000 people on unemployment. So this state is now on a roll.
Governor Crist, you want to respond?
Yeah, there's about 600,000 people that are still unemployed in Florida. Another 700,000 that are not on the job rolls anymore because they've basically given up. That's about 1.3 million people in Florida that are not working today. What I think is important is to understand their plight, what they're dealing with, their challenges. You got to look at who we defend and who we support and why the two of us are running. I'm running to defend the middle class. I'm running to give you a chance. I've always fought for you as your Attorney General and your governor before. Rick Scott is fighting for the big utility companies and the property insurance companies. That's whose side he's on, and that's the difference in the race.
Governor Scott, if you want, yes, of course.
So, I mean, I think the truth is, look at our differences. Charlie grew up with money. He's never had to worry about money his whole life. He didn't have, look, when you grow up worried about money, like my parents did, like I did growing up, where you start a business worrying if you can make payroll, Charlie never did these things. He didn't have parents that worried about putting food on the table or paying for health care. So what I think about every day is I ran for governor for this reason. I want this state to be the place where any family from whatever country, zip code, whatever, you can live a dream. And the dream is you can get a great job and your children can get a great education so they can live the dream.
Thank you, Governor. Governor Crist, if you want to respond, you can.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. If that is so, then why doesn't Governor Scott fight for the middle-class consumers that I meet every single day that are paying higher utility bills, higher property insurance bills? They go higher and higher every year of his administration. When I was elected as your governor the last time, one of the first things I did was call an emergency special session to reduce your property insurance bills, and we did it. Then I called another one to reduce your property taxes, and we got it done. That's somebody who's looking out for you. That's somebody who's on your side. He's on the side of the big utility companies and the big corporations.
If you want, sure.
So first off, utility rates went up under Charlie and went down since I've been governor.
That's not so.
You can go to factsforflorida.com. These are all sort of Charlie facts. He says these things are just not true.
PolitiFact checked it today.
With regard to property taxes, you said property taxes were going to drop like a rock. Charlie, when you were governor, the only thing that dropped like a rock was home prices. They dropped 48% while you were governor. Third, on property insurance, you put the state at significant risk. For each hurricane, the average household would have been responsible for $1,800 of additional fees because of what you did to Citizens Insurance.
Thank you, Governor. Do you want to respond, Governor?
Sure.
Okay.
We haven't had a hurricane in 8 years, and your property insurance rates have gone through the roof. Now, why is that? I'll tell you why. It's because Rick Scott's not letting the Department of Insurance regulate insurance. He actually signed a bill last year that said that the Department of Insurance Regulation cannot regulate insurance. Does that make sense to anybody? It certainly doesn't make sense to the people at home paying higher property insurance rates because of your administration.
I'd like to move on.
That's not true.
I'd like to.
Facts for Florida, Charlie. That's not true at all.
I'd like to move on if I could. Both of you disagree on raising the minimum wage, which is currently in Florida $7.93 an hour. Governor Crist wants to raise it to $10.10 an hour. Governor Scott, you have said that you oppose raising the minimum wage because you think it would be a job killer. Clarify something for Florida voters. Do you support the principle of a minimum wage? Do you support the concept of a minimum wage?
Sure. But here,
What should it be?
Okay. How would I know the private sector decides wages. Let's look at what actually happened. What Charlie says he wants to raise the minimum wage. That, according to the Congressional Budget Office, would lose 500,000 jobs. Charlie, you lost 832,000 jobs when you were governor. How many more jobs can we lose? Now let's look at what Charlie did. He can do anything he wants with the minimum wage, but actually under Charlie, the minimum wage was zero. Charlie 832,000 people went from making money to zero. Charlie, you should be known as the zero wage governor. I don't want to lose any more jobs. Think about where we are. 261,000 job openings. Average income for the top 25 in demand is $27 an hour. That's how you give people better wages. You go find companies to move here like Hertz or Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman. You go out and recruit companies, something, Charlie, you would never do while you're governor.
Governor Scott, if I could just drill down for a second. You said that you support the concept of a minimum wage, but then you said that the private sector sets it. But obviously the minimum wage is set by the government. Do you support the concept of the government setting a minimum wage?
Sure, but the bottom line is, just because they set a minimum wage doesn't mean you get a job. Under Charlie, your minimum wage was $7.93, or it was lower than that. It's gone up since I've been governor. But under Charlie, you know, the minimum wage was zero. 832,000 people lost their job.
All right, I'd like to let Governor Crist respond if you'd like.
Yeah, well, the facts are pretty clear here. He is against raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. And he says the very idea of it makes him cringe. Why? Why would it make anybody cringe to have you have a little bit more money in your pocket? And the statistics are also not what he said, but they're crystal clear that in Seattle, in San Francisco, where the minimum wage has actually been raised, more jobs are being produced, people have more money in their pocket, so you can go to the mom and pop down the street and spend a little bit more and the economy benefits.
Governor Crist, I want to ask you, because some economists do say that raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour would cost 50,000 jobs in Florida. Not 500,000 is a projection nationwide, 50,000 in Florida. We spoke with one Orlando small business owner named Joanne Mark. She tells us she's done the math. and that if the minimum wage goes up to $10.10 an hour, she's going to have to lay off one of her 17 employees. What is your message to that one employee who would be laid off? Why is it worth it?
Well, the reason I think it's worth it is people deserve it. My wife is a small businesswoman, and God bless her, she pays her employees at least $10.10 an hour because she knows it's the right thing to do. I mean, how can somebody get by on $7.93 an hour? As I've said before, I talk to people every day that tell me they're having to work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Now, that's not an economy that's humming along. You know, as I said before, if you're somebody like Rick Scott and you have a private jet and you fly 30,000 feet above people all the time, or you live in an oceanfront mansion, you're out of touch. And you're not feeling what people that are watching tonight are feeling at home. And I know they're hurting. And I know they need somebody who's on their side. I was that governor before. I was that attorney general when I fought the big utilities and when I fought the property insurance companies. And I'll do it again. And in 14 days, you get the opportunity to make that change.
Governor Scott?
Charlie just said it. 50,000 individuals, he doesn't care. That one, Jake, your example, that one employee, Charlie doesn't care. The reason he doesn't care is he's never experienced it. I watched a parent that lose the only family car. I watched the father struggle to buy Christmas presents. I went through all that as a child. Charlie never went through that. Charlie grew up with plenty of money. He's never had to worry about money. He's never had to worry about being laid off. Charlie's done fine in life. But what I'm going to fight for every day is what I've done the last 3 years and 9 months. I'm going to fight for families like mine growing up.
Thank you, Governor Crist.
He talks about that I've done fine in life. Listen, when I was a little kid, we lived in a small apartment in Atlanta when my dad was going to medical school, and he used to deliver newspapers to make ends meet. So you don't know me, and you can't tell my story. And I'm not going to tell yours, but I know you're worth about $100 or $200 million today. And, you know, God bless you for that wealth, Rick. But the way you got it was pretty unsavory. And, you know, the fact that you just don't relate to people, real people in Florida today, and the struggles they have, and you won't lower utility rates, you won't lower property insurance, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Charlie, you raised utility rates when you were governor.
I did not.
They went up.
No.
They've come down since I've been governor. Look, you almost bankrupted our state. You borrowed $9 billion, Charlie. Somebody's got to pay that off. Charlie, when you took office, a family wanted to buy a prepaid to send their child to university was only $100 a month. 4 years later, Charlie, it was $258 a month.
He's talking about bankrupting, if I might, Jake.
Charlie, people can't afford your cost.
Yeah,
we're going to have lots
yours.
more on the other end of this, but we do have to take a quick break. When we come back, these governors are not the only ones on the ballot. Medical marijuana is as well. We'll get their take on that next.